Hello and welcome to Mountain Patriot Homestead. Today I'm going to be sitting and visiting with you for a spell about family history. Well, good afternoon and welcome to Mountain Patriot Homestead. I hope everyone is doing well today. And since it's been a little bit since we've just sat and had a visit, I thought we'd do so this afternoon. And I had a topic on my mind that was brought about by an incident earlier in the week that was on the news that you may or may not have heard, that involved a incident at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, there at the nuclear plant. And what made me think about it today was I got to thinking about my daddy, and he gets on my mind quite a bit. I was always a huge daddy's girl, and even though he passed back in 1993, I still miss him every day, and it's coming up on his birthday, and so he's just on my heart and on my mind. But the events at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, here just this past week has me thinking about him even more, because my daddy, back in the start of World War II, when the United States got involved with World War II, when we officially joined the conflict, my daddy was just shy of being 24 years old. So he was a young man, early 20s, and had his whole life in front of him. He was an Appalachian boy, born and raised up in the Smoky Mountains, and so he had his whole world laid out in front of him. And then we start World War II, and just like many of the young men, well, just pretty much all of the young men his age at that time, he went down to the recruiting station, tried to enlist. I say tried, because he got as far as the medical exam, and they learned, which didn't take a lot to notice, that he had an extra thumb on his right hand. Now, my daddy was left-handed, and that extra thumb didn't inhibit him from doing anything he wanted to do. He was able to shoot or, do anything he wanted to do, and that extra thumb did not get in the way. But because the doctors learned that he was, had polydactyly, which is the extra thumb, they had one solution for it, and that was, we have to cut that off. You can't be an effective soldier if you have an extra thumb. Well, my daddy had the idea that he come into this world with that extra thumb, and he was going out of this world with that extra thumb, and wasn't nobody cutting it off. So they turned him down. They would not let him enlist because he had that extra thumb. So because at that point in time everything was about the war effort, and because he lived less than 100 miles as the crow flies from the location of where a secret city was being built that later became known as Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Now, Oak Ridge didn't come about until World War II, and it was one of 3 sites. If you've ever heard of the Manhattan Project, it was the first of 3 sites where the Manhattan Project took place. Now, the people that were recruited to work that area had no idea what they were really going into. All they knew is it was work, and it was helping the war effort, and so they signed up and were bussed in. Now, Oak Ridge, Tennessee went from being a little, kind of like here, little hole in the wall back in the boondocks kind of place, and all of a sudden there were huts being built and tents being erected and things, just really hurriedly trying, because we were in a race with the Germans to build the first atomic bomb. Now, those people that were going in there to work had no idea what they were going to do. Now, I'm sure scientists and those folks did, but the general laborers had no idea, and most of those were women. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book called The Ignored Heroes of World War II, but it's a book that was written and tells a lot about the lives of the people that were there at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Well, my daddy was one of those folks that signed up to work. And again, he had no idea. All he knew, it was a job, and they were paying for people to come in there and work. And so he bussed in and he got there. And once you got there on site, they pretty much, it was a very restrictive life, because you weren't supposed to tell your family what you were doing there. You really weren't supposed to tell anybody where you were at. You were there, and it was a definite matter of, now the term would be Homeland Security. Back then it was national security, and it was something that you just did not talk about. And so my daddy got there, and he worked there for a while, started noticing some strange things, and being a man of not minding to ask questions, he did. Of course, most of them still didn't know much information, but he learned enough to figure out, yeah, I don't like this. And it wasn't that he didn't like helping the war effort. Mostly it was because being a very independent hill man raised up in those mountains, being told when you could go somewhere, when you couldn't, who you could talk to, who you couldn't, he didn't particularly care for that. So after a while, he decided, I'm just not staying here. Well, again, it was during wartime, and you couldn't just, even in those civilian workplaces, you weren't supposed to just leave. But he went home on leave, and he didn't go back. And if he'd have been a soldier, he would have been declared AWOL, but because he was a civilian employee, he wasn't. However, that didn't stop the government from coming to look for him, because they wanted to make sure he wasn't, I guess, selling our secrets to the enemy. But before they noticed he was really missing, he found out from one of his uncles that there was a lot of construction going on at some of the southern bases in the southeast part of the United States. And so he went to work with his uncle. Him and his uncle and some other men that he knew went and became part of the civilian corps that started rebuilding and expanding a bunch of the bases. And one of the bases that he worked at and built quite a few of the old barracks, which they were new barracks back then, but built barracks at, was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina. If any of you have ever heard of it, was Camp Jackson. During the war, it became Fort Jackson. And their motto there, and still is victory starts here. And so my daddy built quite a few of the barracks then. And of course, those barracks, I believe it was, I'm trying to remember what year, maybe 2006, those old barracks were finally torn down, pretty much because they had no air conditioning, they barely had fans in them, and if anybody was unfortunate enough, especially as we get older and more spoiled, as time marched on and people got spoiled to air conditioners, nobody wanted to stay in those barracks because they were hot. If you've ever been in Columbia, South Carolina in the summertime, there are a lot of Black Flag days, which means it is hot and the humidity is 100% and it's very miserable. if you don't have some type of wind stirring or something. And so people didn't want to stay in those barracks, and they just became very outdated and, of course, old. And the military has since built, newer barracks, and that just meant that the old barracks it was time for them to come down. While I was in basic training there in 1983, I got to see those barracks that my daddy built during World War II. And so that was kind of special to me. And, it's just part of family history when you can see history and put names and faces to those places. It just means so much more. I enjoy history so much more now than I did in school when it was just memorizing, pretty much memorizing dates and what happened on that date. Once I really got into family history and my family tree, history came alive for me. And I have to credit a teacher back in grade school with the very first assignment where we had to do just a little short family history, just a few little generations, and that just kind of awoke a desire in me to know more about my ancestors. And so since I was a child, I have been trying to learn more and more about my family history. I do know that my first ancestors that arrived in what is now the United States, they first got here back, it was in the early 1620s. So a little over 150 years before the United States became the United States. And even before that, if you think about each one of us that's alive today, our lineage runs back to the very first creation, because it's been unbroken all through that time that it's not like we just sprang up in 1850. Our ancestry goes back to the very first man and woman. And so if you think about our family history, it goes back thousands and thousands of years. And I guess my biggest regret is that I never wrote down my daddy's stories and my mama's stories when they were alive. And I hear that from a lot of people, that they heard their mama or daddy or grandma and grandpa tell stories of back in the day, and they never wrote those stories down, or they didn't get them recorded in some way. And so I hope that just by doing this video, it's just a little piece. If nothing else, if nobody else listens to this story but my children, at least it's a recorded history, that they have a little bit more story of what their grandpa did, and a little bit during World War II. So if you are interested at all in your family history, please ask your elders. Find out before they're gone, because once they're gone, that's a whole book of history that is gone with them. So take the time, find out, learn about your family history, and just try to record it in some way, whether it's some little recording that nobody but you will ever see, and then you pass it on to your children. But make sure that you do that before it's too late, and then you say, I wish that I had. So there's just a little bit of my family history, and I hope everyone is doing well today. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and that you know that you're loved. I do love you. Thank you for everyone that subscribes to this channel. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to do so. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed, I would love for you to go down there and hit that little bell and subscribe to this channel. If you have any comments, please don't hesitate to leave them. I wish you all a wonderful evening. Mountain Patriot Homestead, signing out.